Okay, our daily fuel, here we go. We are going through the New Testament in a year, and we are making progress. We're going to finish the New Testament in a year, so pretty exciting. The Apostle Paul is telling them that it's all about grace, and it's Jesus plus nothing is the theme of the book of Galatians. Paul had started these churches. Of course, he was Jewish, and whenever he would go and start a church, he would usually go to the synagogue first and show them that Jesus was the fulfillment of everything Old Testament. And so he would teach them that Jesus was the fulfillment of all of these things, that Jesus was the Lamb, Jesus was the Passover Lamb. Fellowships would start, churches would begin. And no sooner would they begin, but these guys would come around that they called them the Judaizers, and they would say, it's wonderful that you came to faith in Jesus Christ, but now you need to go the rest of the way and follow the law of Moses. You need to get circumcised, keep the 10 Commandments, keep the festivals, keep the days, keep the food, keep all of this stuff. The Apostle Paul said, no way. It's grace. It's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus plus nothing nothing. So we are in chapter 2, where Paul is giving the story of his conversion and how his ministry began. And he says he had gone up to Jerusalem and he had met some of the apostles there. In chapter 2, he says, after 14 years, I went again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. And he goes with Barnabas because they were in the same church together in Antioch. And he said, I took Titus along also. And I went in response to a revelation and meeting privately with those esteemed to be leaders. I presented them the gospel I preach among the Gentiles. I want to make sure I wasn't running in vain or had been running the race in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised. So Paul's starting churches in Gentile areas and picks up Titus, and Titus goes up to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, they're not telling him that he needs to get circumcised. So if this was a teaching that was coming from the Jerusalem church, you need to get circumcised in order to be saved. Well, Titus didn't need to be, and they didn't compel him to be. He said, even though he was a Greek, they didn't tell him to do it. And this matter arose because of some false believers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. False believers. And these were those ones, again, that they called the Judaizers, the ones that were trying to tell them that they needed to follow all of the Old Testament law in order to be saved. And they're false brothers because they were pretending to be Christians when they weren't. And they were pretending to come around as Christians and say, well, it was nice what Paul taught you, but that's not the end of it. There's still more. Paul said, they just want to make you slaves. You have freedom in Christ. We didn't give in to them for a moment so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. The truth of the gospel is what? It's Jesus Christ plus nothing. There's nothing you can add to it. And as for those who were held in high esteem, well, he said, whatever they were, it doesn't make any difference to me. God doesn't show favoritism. So this isn't Paul being disrespectful. He's just saying that, you know what? It doesn't really matter. He said, if an angel preaches a false gospel, then reject it. He said, they added nothing to my message. So he gets up to Jerusalem and finds out what the original church up there had been teaching, the mother church, where the Jesus movement started. And he said, they didn't have anything to add to my message. Same thing, Jesus plus nothing, and plus nothing. On the contrary, they recognized I had been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the uncircumcised, that would be the Gentiles, all of those who weren't Jewish, just as Peter had been given to the circumcised. For God, who was at work in Peter as an apostle of the circumcised, was also at work in me as an apostle to the Gentiles. So James and Cephas and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave Barnabas and I the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace that was given to me. And they agreed that we should go to the Gentiles, and they would go to the circumcised. They would go to the Jewish community. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor. Well, that's a Christian characteristic, remembering the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. Now, this is kind of interesting because the Apostle Paul was schooled in all of the things Judaism. He was rising in the ranks. He knew all the theology. He knew the Bible. He knew the history. He knew everything. He grew up in a religious community, wearing religious clothes, eating religious food, going to religious schools, having religious friends. You would think that he would be the one that God would use in Jerusalem. Like he had all of that in the background. Peter, he's a fisherman up in the Galilee. He doesn't have any of that education. He hasn't been trained by the rabbis. He doesn't have any of that upbringing. And he's the one who God uses to go to the educated Jewish people, the educated Hebrew people. God does that. God, you have no idea how God is going to use you. And so it's you would think that he would send Paul to the Jews and he would send Peter to the Gentiles, because Peter's more like the Gentiles. But hey, pretty exciting the way God does things. He said when Cephas came to Antioch, where Paul's church was, that little church in Antioch, he said, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. Wow. Peter, the chief apostle, Paul is standing up to him to his face. He said, for certain men, they knew who they were. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Now here's some spiritual peer pressure. Peter knows that you're not saved by keeping the law and keeping the feasts and keeping the festivals and keeping the food and keeping all of those things. But he did it. He did it. But when he's around the Gentiles, when he was with Paul, he was like, it doesn't matter. I understand it doesn't matter. But when these guys come up with the religious peer pressure, he gives into it. And Paul's like, you're a hypocrite, man. You're a hypocrite. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. You see, when spiritual sickness enters in, it spreads like gangrene. Keep it pure. It's Jesus plus nothing plus nothing. Don't get people confused. Don't lay religious trips on people. When I saw they weren't acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of all of them, Cephas is Peter, you're a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, not like a Jew. How is it then that you force the Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? What are you doing? What are you doing? Jesus talked about this when he said, Matthew 23, about the religious leaders. He said, you guys put heavy yokes on people, and neither we or our fathers have been able to carry. And now you're coming doing this? Don't be a hypocrite. Ever get a tickle in your throat? I have. And he said, we who are Jews by birth and not sinful Gentiles, Paul was born a Hebrew, as was Peter, know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. You're not saved by keeping all the religious rules. You're saved by Jesus. So we too have put our faith in Christ Jesus, that we might be justified by faith and not by the works of the law. Because by the works of the law, no one will be justified. You can't make yourself right by doing all the good things, by doing all the right things. You will always fall short. We need Jesus, the one who never ever sinned, who died for us and makes us righteous, not on the basis of what we've done, but on the basis of what he did. But if in seeking to be justified in Christ, we Jews find ourselves also among the sinners, doesn't that mean that Christ promotes sin? Absolutely not. If I rebuild what I destroyed, I would be a lawbreaker. Verse 20, sorry. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. That's what baptism is. You go down into the waters and you die with Jesus on the cross. The life that I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me, resurrected from the dead. I don't set aside the grace of God. For if righteousness could have been gained by keeping all of the Old Testament, Christ died for nothing. It's Jesus plus nothing plus nothing. People always want to put religious trips on you. And maybe it's not the trips that was happening in the first century there with these guys, but other religious trips. You must do this, you must do that, you got to go to this church, you got to do it this way. Have you done this? Listen, it's Jesus plus nothing, then it's plus nothing. Jesus plus nothing. That's the gospel. Hey, love you guys. Keep it simple. Jesus.